Greetings and welcome to our Lecture 2, dealing with our Unit 9, the Middle Ages. Today's lesson is discussing the early Germanic kingdoms after the fall of Rome, and one of the most powerful, respected kings during the early centuries of the Middle Ages, Charlemagne. As usual, please make sure you have your Lecture 2 worksheet available and are filling it out as we go along. And if you have any questions near the end, please feel free to go back and review or ask me any questions you may have, and we'll get those cleared up as quickly as possible so that you know the material to better prepare you for the assessments. And with that, let's get started. Here we see the lay of the land and the kingdoms of Western Europe prior to 530 CE. This is prior to the unification which we'll be talking about today. So this is before the kingdoms joined forces together to create several larger kingdoms instead of all these small kingdoms. So they're Germanic kingdoms. In the upheaval between 400 and 600, small Germanic kingdoms replaced the Roman Empire provinces. Borders were changing constantly because of all the different battles between the different tribes. Family ties and personal loyalty were more important than public government and written law. Germanic stresses on personal ties, which made it impossible to establish orderly government. Basically, this is just saying people were basically all out for them families and all out for themselves. There was really no unity, no cohesion, no working together for the betterment of the country or the kingdom. It was everybody trying to survive on their own in their own distinct territories or tribes. The word Franks was used during the Middle Ages from the people who lived in Eastern Europe to identify those who lived in Western Europe. In truth, they were a group of small tribes that were independent of each other, but did have a common language and some common heritage. By this time, the Franks had some control over Gaul, which is modern-day France and Switzerland. If you recall from Lecture 1, after the fall of Rome in the late 400s, there was a problem with no common language. This was referring to the difference between the Roman and the Germanic invaders. In the region of Gaul, though, the people here did have a common language, and even though most could not read or write, they did still have some education in the monasteries for those that were rich and sent their kids there. History looks back and points to Clovis as a place to begin studying Germanic kingdoms. Clovis was a leader of the Franks. Back in the day, there were many different tribes of Franks. Clovis became the king of the Salon Franks at the age of 15 in 481 CE, when his father had died. During this time, Christianity was a constant variable in the Middle Ages. During one of his many battles, Clovis noticed that his forces were in a position to lose. Clovis feared that the defeat of the Germanic tribes and then appealed to the Christian God. Clovis's wife, Clotilde, was already a Catholic and had been trying to convert Clovis for some time. Clovis prayed for victory. Sure enough, the battle shifted in his favor, and the Franks win. Sometime after the battle, Clovis and 3,000 of his warriors asked a bishop to baptize them. After his baptism, Clovis was welcomed by the Roman Catholic Church, and this made him unique in the fact that most of the other Frankish kings practice Arian Christianity, just a different form of Christianity. The fact that Clovis kept winning his battles would certainly make the Roman Church look better. In 509 CE, Clovis was declared king of the Franks after defeating the remaining Frankish tribes. By 511, Clovis had united the Franks into one kingdom, and however, according to tradition, he died on November 27th in 511 CE. After the success of Clovis I, the Franks now controlled the largest and strongest of Europe's kingdoms. Clovis died in 511. The Franks controlled most of modern France. Now, in order to move on, we need to understand a couple things first about a particular position known as the mayor of the palace. The Frankish position of mayor of the palace, or mayor domus, was the personal assistant to the king. This position became the most powerful Frankish position in the kingdom. Officially, he had charge of the royal households and estates. It's kind of like a landlord, basically. But unofficially, this person led armies, made policy, and was essentially ruling the kingdom. One of these mayors of palace was Charles Martel. Charles Martel was also known as Charles the Hammer, and was given the position of mayor of the palace in 718 CE. By 719, Charles held more power than the king. Charles was part of the Franks. He therefore was Christian. While mayor of the palace, Charles was regarded as a skilled administrator and warrior. He was attributed also to helping create the idea of feudalism and knighthood. In an effort to expel Islam from Europe, Charles was able to defeat the Muslim raiders from Spain at the Battle of Tours in 732 CE. Historians argue that if the Christians had lost at the Battle of Tours, Muslims would have taken over Europe. His win in the Battle of Tours made Charles a Christian hero, and therefore he was a Christianity wins. After the death of Charles on October 22nd, 741, Charles split up his land to both of his sons. However, Charles passed his power as king to Pepin the Short. He not necessarily was short, that's just a name that was apparently stuck to him, kind of like a nickname. Soon after, the Pope appoints or anoints Pepin king by the grace of God, thus beginning the Carolingian dynasty. They would rule the Franks from 751 to 987 CE, and later it would be Pepin's son Charlemagne that would become the first emperor in Europe since the fall of Rome 300 years prior. And on with Charlemagne. Charlemagne becomes emperor. Pepin the Short died in 768 CE and split the power of the kingdom between his two sons, Carloman I and Charles. Let's see here. After the unexplained death of Carloman I in 771, Charles the Great, better known as Charlemagne, becomes the sole king of the Frankish kingdom. Charlemagne was an imposing person, standing at 6 feet 4 inches. It was pretty tall for those times, so a tall guy on top of a horse to boot, certainly an intimidating person. Once king, Charlemagne was the most powerful king in Western Europe. While king, he removed the Lamurds, which was another ruling family, from northern Italy and led incursions into Muslim territories in Spain. Charlemagne ends up building an empire greater than any known since that of the Romans. He also battled people to the east and the south, all while spreading Christianity. This unified Western Europe, these battles that he won, unified Western Europe for the first time since the Roman Empire. This empire would become known as the Holy Roman Empire. Charlemagne strengthened his power by weakening the power of the nobles. He split up the empire into different parts, making it under the control of certain nobles. Charlemagne, however, paid very close eye to these nobles by sending out royal agents to check on the powerful nobles from time to time. He also regularly visited these kingdoms as well. Charlemagne is also noted for encouraging learning in the kingdom. He set an example of this by surrounding himself with scholars and ordered the creation of new monasteries, since there weren't any schools at the time. He even got to the point to himself learning his alphabet and learning to read and write, since he did not know how to do so himself. He figured in order to get the people to follow his lead, or to do what he asks, he needs to do it himself and be a good leader by setting an example. In the year 800, Charlemagne traveled to Rome to protect the Pope. Because of this, Pope Leo III ended up crowning him emperor on Christmas Day in 800 CE. Even though this was a huge thing to have a new emperor, this act symbolized that the Pope had more power than the king. Charlemagne eventually died in 418 CE, and later on the empire that was Charlemagne's would be broken up and divided amongst his grandchildren. This predictably became a problem and the downfall of the dynasty. The Carolingian kings lost power, leading to the breakdown of authority. This, however, would lead to the rise of feudalism. The end result. Through Christianity, Clovis I was able to unite the Franks into a strong Christian military power. Charles Martel solidified Christianity's strength in Europe, which helped lead to the eventual rise of the more powerful Frankish king, Charlemagne. And with that, here we have my bibliography showing you where I got my information from. Feel free to look at any of these links if you'd like to get some more information about them, and I will also have some other resources available on the SLC site for you to check out as well. Now, time for some fun facts. Charlemagne wasn't just a good king, but a loved king. During his lifetime, he ended up having 4 wives, 14 children from various different marriages. He also had at least 6 concubines, which are also mistresses, which also produced 5 more children. So not only was he good on the battlefield, apparently he was good romantically as well. Charlemagne died on January 28th in the year 813 CE. According to stories, years after his death, a monk entered the tomb to check on the tomb of Charlemagne and found his body upright on the throne with the crown still on his head and his flesh almost entirely incorrupt or unchanged. So very little decomposing of the body as the story goes. Later on, in 1165, his tomb was again opened and the remains were placed in a sarcophagus and placed beneath the floor of the cathedral where he was buried at. Later on, once again in 1215, the remains were removed from the sarcophagus and laid in a casket made of gold and silver. And here's a picture of that. A couple years back, they actually opened up the coffin and took a couple samples of the bones that they found that were in there. Now, they could not 100% guarantee that those were the remains of Charlemagne, but they were able to identify that it was the remains of a fairly older, thin gentleman who apparently had a limp in his knee, so probably because of his old age. So based on that, they're pretty sure that the remains inside this coffin are actually Charlemagne's back from the early 800s. And with that, I am done. Hope you enjoyed it. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. And as always, stay awesome.